What's happening, people? Back with another reaction, back with some more Bad Religion, and we're going back to their No Control album. I've mentioned it a number of times. This will always be one of my very favorite albums from them. And indeed, I've mentioned it a few times, the three-album run of Suffer, No Control Against the Grain. Despite me liking all their albums, that will probably always be my favorite sort of period in their history. It was like they couldn't put a song wrong, they couldn't put a foot wrong, as they say in football commentary. Just everything they did is top quality during that period, as far as I'm concerned. So we're going to listen to a tune called Progress, which I really enjoy lyrically, and it was a song that, when I was getting into Bad Religion as a teenager, is one of the songs that really set my brain alight and had me thinking about ideas that, through my studies of history and, as I was becoming an adult, I was not only, engaged in my studies to a certain degree. Sure, I was also, partying in high school and going to, techno parties on the weekend and staying up till, 5 in the morning and then going to school and no sleep and doing all those things that I think a lot of teenagers do. But I was sort of engaged in my studies, and I was also beginning to, pursue intellectual matters and nonfiction literature on my own. And so when I heard this song, it was already resonating with things that I was beginning to read and consider on my own. And that is to say, it's a song about the term and concept of progress, which, for generations of people, especially those who were perhaps sort of influenced and inspired by the Enlightenment, which, to be clear, it's a very complicated concept, and ultimately we historians are wary of periodization anyway, because you're talking about people who lived thousands of miles apart, maybe never met each other, probably had ideas that didn't always agree on certain details, but are nevertheless considered like articulating the same vision that, characterizes that period. So we're very wary of periods, but again, the Enlightenment, such as it existed or such as it is useful as a didactic tool in history, it was more optimistic about humankind's possibilities, and it was more equitable in terms of what it viewed to be the appropriate allocation of power and influence and resources to humans. It was more broad in its approach to, just who qualified to earn rights and liberties. Now, again, the way this played out in practice, was often very restricted and very, limited by cultural and, ethno-cultural attitudes and political forces and so on. But one of the aspects of the Enlightenment that was more or less soon baked into like popular culture and intellectual society, at least in what we sometimes call the West, although that's a gross oversimplification, that's full of problematic connotations and so on. But one of the things that sort of came out of this Enlightenment idea is that progress, that, generally speaking, humans learn to do things better and they learn to do things more fairly over time. Now, again, depending on where you are and who you are, that might seem a sort of laughable irony if you're in, the oppressed margins, or if you're someone who ultimately is, not even considered a citizen, in the nation state in which you live and so on. But again, there was this idea that progress, almost as this sort of personified force, would eventually lead humans to keep improving the world, improving the world, improving the world, and eventually it would get to the point where everyone would be living a convenient and comfortable life with great technology, and the resources would be allocated more reasonably, but also more volume for everybody. But the reality is, historically, at the very least, that hasn't necessarily been the case, and more to the point, when we do see the development of technology and the, alteration of society in the wake of that technological development, what we often see is that there's no real master plan. There's no clear vision, and oftentimes there are conflicting visions of exactly who should benefit from these developments and, who gets to partake in their unfolding and access. And ultimately, what ends up happening more is that the very processes which are considered to be indicative of progress, be it the development of private vehicles which allow individuals to travel at their leisure, at their will, for their work, and so on, but they didn't have the whole sort of a global perspective in mind, and so ultimately they did things and they created technology that leads to pollution, that leads to, carbon in the atmosphere, which has caused all sorts of new problems, which hurts people on the margins, people on the fringes, even more than people at the center of societies and civilizations. So it becomes this very like Goethe, or Goethe as I might have called him as a teenager until I learned better, but it's this very Goethe sort of concept of progress whereby like we're so enamored with this idea of progress, of improving things, that we don't realize that this convenience that it affords us is actually killing us at the same time, and it's actually furthering the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it's actually like committing us to forms of civilization that in the end will be self-destructive. And in many cases we actually sort of understand that to some degree now, but we're so entrenched in these ways of existing, in this sort of thought process of, oh, everything's just going to keep getting better, we just got to keep making better computer chips and keep growing the economy, and eventually everything's all going to work out. And this song really highlights the way in which that is not always the case, the way in which progress often comes with a cost and someone has to pay it. And eventually, if we're not careful, we'll all have to pay it. So yeah, it's a song which sort of chastises that like rose-tinted view, that enlightenment-saturated view of the concept of human progress and what that means. And ultimately, it makes me think of a book, by Marshall Berman, which is called All That Is Solid Melts into Air, in which he actually talks for a chapter or two about Goethe and his Dr. Faust, or Faustus, which, if you haven't read Goethe's Faust, it's long, and it's 2 parts, it is very long, but it's really a good read for a piece of literature that old, and it's very prescient in terms of the questions that would begin to come up. It's like, oh, we're developing this city and it's going to be much better to have more access for everyone and it'll be like very convenient. Yeah, but there's some old people there who don't really want to move. Like they've had that house forever. Yeah, but they understand like progress, it doesn't wait. Like it's knocking on the door of opportunity and you have to like, just take care of it. Just, make them understand, like whatever. And then he comes back and Mephistopheles is like, yeah, it's taken care of. Now we can build the whole city. There's no more problems, whatever. Oh, what happened to that old couple? Oh, well, we kicked them out, and then they actually died of exposure. It's like, well, I didn't want that. It's like, well, you wanted progress. What did you think happens when progress comes? This, like, you can't say that you want progress on the one hand and then be all sentimental about, like, things that are actually backward and not really forward-looking on the other hand. You can't have it both ways, man. So, again, there's a real Faustian, Goethe, Marshall Berman-esque conflicted take on progress. So at this point you're probably saying, shut the hell up and just play the tune, so I'll get to it. But this is a very lyrically rich song, and it's always struck me as such, and as I've gotten older and read more things, it's only become more and more prescient to my mind. So, again, apologies for that, but here we go. This is Bad Religion, Progress, from their album No Control, which is 1989 on Epitaph Records. Intelligently planned. In red, white, and blue, it's the structure of our future as the light comes feeding through. It's progress till there's nothing left to gain. It's progress till there's nothing left to gain. So pouring in gold to contribute more to the destruction of this world you are gonna live life on earth. Just wanna flash up on. So before you go to contribute more to this destruction of the world that we all adore. Holy shit. It's a debt we almost pay. It's the convenience we cherish and the pollution we disdain. Get the fuck out of here. backing vocals. We almost made it. Yeah, it's brilliant. Obviously, I don't need to say much more about the lyrics. I think I talked endlessly about it beforehand. But yeah, I think that is a really profound song. And again, like I know this is later 80s, so by this time they're in their mid, maybe moving into the second half of their 20s. They're like 26 or 27. But the songwriting ability, I like a lot of different kinds of bands. And there are a lot of great songwriters. Some of you will notice I'm doing a lot of Duran Duran songs recently. One of the reasons I've fallen in love with that band is because Simon Le Bon has this crazy, cryptic, metaphorical songwriting style, and he sort of like sets a scene and paints a concept, but he doesn't necessarily fill in all the details. So again, I like all different bands. I like a lot of different songwriters, but to me, the Graffin Gurewitz songwriting partnership is some of the best songwriting I've seen in any genre, any band, and I think this is a fantastic example. Don't know offhand which of the two wrote it. Be curious if someone out there already has that in your heads. Let me know. But yeah, bottom line, their songwriting is absolutely unbelievable, and the fact that they were writing such songs with such sort of considered prose and very analytical understandings in their mid-20s is just so impressive to me. It's a lot of people don't come to this level of understanding even many years later in their life. So yeah, big ups to Bad Religion. Let me know what you think. Other than that, thank you for listening and watching. I apologize for the verbosity, but I will see you next time.